The steppe wind roared like a blast from a furnace, crashing against the cockpit of the IL-2 Sturmovik as Lieutenant Ivan Petrov gripped the control stick with gloved hands. He was 19 years old. Sweat and dust gleamed on his face, and his heart pounded like a war drum. Below him stretched the land around Kursk, waves of sun-scorched yellow steppe broken only by flashes of metal. German tanks, dozens of them, were advancing toward a narrow ravine where over 800 Soviet infantrymen were trapped with no chance of escape. A persistent voice came through his headset. "Stand down. Return to base immediately. You are not authorized to engage the enemy." But Ivan barely heard the order. His lips whispered words meant only for himself. "I won't let them die." He jerked the nose of the plane downward and dove. The engines roared. The sky blurred into streaks, and anti-aircraft fire clawed at him from below. In that moment, the war changed. The rookie no one trusted. Ivan Petrov was the youngest pilot in his squadron. Just 19, he had never seen the sea before being sent to the front, never flown over an actual battlefield, never even fired his weapons outside of training flights. His home village was just a dot on the map near Sverdlovsk. Flatland, wheat fields, long dusty roads. His father was a mechanic, his mother worked at the local post office. He was not born a hero. He was raised on hard work, humility, and respect for his elders. When he enlisted at 18, just weeks after the war began, he had a boyish smile and a quiet voice. He completed flight school faster than expected, not because he was the best, but because the war needed men in the air. By 1943, the Red Army was suffering terrible losses among its pilots. Sturmovik crews were especially hard hit. 1 in 3 never returned from a mission. Ivan knew the odds. Everyone did. When he first stepped into the squadron tent, the older pilots sized him up. Some smirked. One shouted, "Hey, Ural boy, did you come to fly or dig potatoes?" They didn't wish him harm, but they didn't expect much either. At first, he flew reconnaissance missions, low risk, low expectations. He followed orders precisely, kept formation, avoided trouble, but he felt the war pulling him in. Flying over the battlefield wasn't enough. He wanted to be useful, to matter, to protect the men on the ground. Late at night, he lay on his bunk listening to distant artillery and imagined what it was like down there. Trapped, terrified, praying for help. He began volunteering more, asking to lead flights, requesting bombing missions. His commander would say, "Not yet, Petrov. You're too green." Ivan kept insisting. "Comrade commander," he said once, "I didn't go through all this just to circle the sky and come home." Still, command remained firm. He would fly reconnaissance and nothing else. That was exactly what he was doing on July 5, 1943, the day everything changed. The day a young man with no combat victories, no decorations, and barely 100 hours of flight time got the chance to do the impossible. And he seized it. The regiment was in danger. In early July 1943, the summer sun was merciless, baking the earth into cracked clay, making every step a struggle against dust and heat. This was the Battle of Kursk, the decisive battlefield on the Eastern Front. Soviet and British forces were pressing the German units, but Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's veterans would not retreat without a fight. Every hill, every ravine, every pile of stones could be a trap. That morning, the 102nd Guards Rifle Regiment received orders to advance through a narrow valley west of the village of Prokhorovka. It was supposed to be a routine sweep, light resistance, a quick push, linking up with armored support by sunset. But war is never routine. Allied command did not know that German scouts had spotted the maneuver the night before. The counter-ambush was already in motion. 3 companies of Panzer IV tanks, supported by artillery and infantry, moved silently through the hills, encircling the valley by dawn. By noon, the trap snapped shut. The 102nd Regiment was surrounded. Forward movement was blocked by tank fire. Retreat was cut off by ground shattered from German bombardment. Radio communication was, at best, intermittent. Operators constantly switched channels, trying to get in touch with anyone who could hear them. Meanwhile, Ivan Petrov was already in the skies above. His IL-2 Sturmovik climbed into position alongside 5 other planes from his squadron. Their mission: a high-altitude reconnaissance run along Route 12. Look for troop movements. No engagement, no low-altitude flights. Ivan adjusted his summer goggles and silently listened as the squadron commander repeated the orders. Maintain altitude, observe, return. But just minutes after reaching the target zone, Ivan noticed something strange. The valley floor was crawling with activity, too much for a simple supply convoy or routine patrol. Dust clouds rose from tank treads. Muzzle flashes sparkled along the ridges. Smoke coiled upward like warning signals. Ivan squinted. Something was very wrong. He switched radio channels. What he heard wasn't interference. It was chaos. Desperate voices overlapping each other in panic. We're pinned down. We need air support. Can anyone hear us? They're coming from the hills, from the north and west. For God's sake, where's our cover? Ivan recognized one voice. It belonged to Private Alexei Sokolov, a guy from near Voronezh who had once shared a cup of coffee with him during a supply delay. Ivan remembered Alexei showing him a photo of his wife and newborn daughter. Now the voice was barely recognizable. Choked with fear, hoarse from panic, the squadron commander returned to the main channel. All aircraft, withdraw west. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Return to base immediately. One by one, the planes began turning toward home. Ivan did not move. He looked down again. The tanks were closing the circle. Soviet soldiers in the ravine were like fish in a barrel. No artillery spotters. No friendly armor nearby. The sky held no one but him. He pressed the microphone. Commander, this is Lieutenant Petrov, requesting immediate permission to attack. I see German armor advancing on our troops. Silence. Then, negative. Petrov, you are not authorized. Return to base. Through a secondary channel, another shout broke through. We're being torn apart here. Where the hell is our air support? Ivan glanced at his instruments. Half his fuel remained. He carried 900 kilograms of ordnance, 450 under each wing. He had trained for this. He had practiced every angle, every drop speed, every last second of the dive. He looked left. His wingman, Lieutenant Orlov, was still in formation. I'm going in, Ivan said over the microphone. What, Ivan? Did you hear the order? This is suicide, Orlov shouted, his voice trembling. Ivan said nothing. He broke formation, nose down, straight into the storm of fire. Orlov screamed after him. The wind howled louder than the radio. Anti-aircraft shells exploded around him in black plumes. The sky became a cage of detonating steel. His plane shook violently. The left wing was grazed, but still intact. At 1,500 meters, he deployed the dive brakes. At 1,000 meters, he leveled his sights. Tanks clustered at the valley entrance, ready to break through for the final strike. At 500 meters, he armed the bombs. His hands were steady now. His heartbeat slowed. He whispered to himself, not with fear, but with clarity. For Alexei, for all of them. At 300 meters, he released the bombs. Both hit cleanly. He yanked the stick toward him with all his strength. Muscles strained. G-forces blurred his vision. The ground rushed up like a wall. Then fire. A deafening explosion behind him. He barely stayed in the air, but the infantry on the ground looked up. What they saw was etched into memory forever. One Sturmovik, alone in the sky, diving straight on enemy guns, smashing through the German line. A miracle, a madman, a moment that saved them all. Reckless, yes. For a few seconds after the blast, there was silence. No one in the 102nd Guards Regiment moved or spoke. Soldiers blinked at the sky, stunned by both fury and its sudden absence. Where moments before they had seen death advancing in armored columns, now there was smoke, fire, and wreckage. The lead German tank vanished in a pillar of flame. The tank behind it flipped onto its side, its tracks spinning uselessly. The rest of the column froze in confusion. From the ground, it looked like a myth. A lone plane, descending from nowhere, cutting through chaos like divine judgment. But in the cockpit, nothing felt divine. Ivan Petrov fought the controls. The explosion shook his plane. The flaps on the left wing were half torn. The cockpit rattled like a box of nails in a dryer. Sirens wailed. Smoke curled from under the engine cowling. Throttle response lagged. The controls felt sticky, as if coated in tar, yet he still flew. He checked his altitude, 60 meters above the ground. He was so low that, passing over the soldiers' heads, he could see their faces, young, dirty, wide-eyed, alive. He began climbing, coughing from the acrid smell of fuel and oil in the cockpit. As he gained altitude, he saw the effect of his dive. The German forces were disoriented. Several tanks tried to reposition, but the natural narrowness of the valley worked against them. Infantry units scattered, seeking cover, assuming more planes were coming. But there were no other planes. Only Ivan. Back at base, the radio channels were chaos. His squadron returned, reporting that Petrov was missing in action, or possibly shot down. The commander paced furiously. Protocol had been broken. Unauthorized engagement, potential loss of plane and pilot. Then the impossible happened. A fragmented report came from a forward observer of the 102nd Regiment. Whoever hit that armored column were holding our ground. Enemy advance stopped. I repeat, advance stopped. You bought us time. Then another voice spoke. We saw it. One little bird, one dive, took out the lead tanks and saved our asses. Don't know who it was, but the whole regiment owes them. Back in the air, Ivan turned his plane toward home. The fuel gauge was dangerously low. Oil pressure was dropping. The Sturmovik was a sturdy bird, built to take damage, but it wasn't made to fly in this condition. As he limped back to base, he stayed low, hugging the ground. Every vibration, every engine hiccup could have meant the end, but he kept talking to the plane, as if it were alive. Come on, girl. A little more. Don't fail me now. When the runway came into view, he felt a mix of relief and dread. The base did not greet him with applause. It awaited him with disciplinary action. He landed hard. The plane bounced once, skidded, then ground to a stop with a screech of torn metal. Ground crews rushed out with fire extinguishers, dousing the engine before it could ignite. Ivan climbed out, legs shaking, soaked in sweat. His commander ran up. What the hell were you thinking? The officer barked. You disobeyed orders, broke formation, risked the entire aircraft. Ivan said nothing. You could have died. Still silence. The officer drew a breath to continue, but before he could, a young corporal ran up, radio in hand. Comrade Commander, urgent report from Infantry Command. The officer turned, annoyed. What is it? The corporal hesitated, then said, They say Lieutenant Petrov saved the 102nd Regiment. Tanks destroyed, sir. Germans are retreating from the valley. Command credits this attack with our success. A long silence followed. Ivan finally spoke, his voice steady. I heard them over the secondary channel. They were dying down there. The officer stared at him, then turned and walked away without another word. That night, Ivan sat alone by the hangar, still in his flight suit, sipping from a battered flask. He didn't feel like a hero. His hands still shook. His ears still rang from the dive. He had done the only thing that felt right, and part of him expected consequences. But under the stars and the cooling steppe, he knew something had changed. Not just for the men he saved, but for himself. He was no longer just a rookie. He was someone who did what no one else dared. Hero or fool. The next morning, The base buzzed with whispers. Some pilots said Petrov was finished. Disobeying a direct order was no joke. Even with noble intentions, his actions were reckless, unauthorized, dangerous, potentially punishable by death or court-martial. Some said he was lucky to survive, that his plane should have broken apart mid-dive, that he had no right to make that decision. Others said differently. They said they wished they had the courage to follow him. That same morning, an official report arrived, printed in the crisp language of military bureaucracy. It stated that at 1400 hours on July 5th, an enemy armored column, consisting of at least 11 Panzer IV tanks and accompanying mechanized infantry, was halted in its advance by a precise airstrike delivered by an unidentified Soviet aircraft. As a result, over 200 infantrymen were able to retreat to defensive positions. Additional reinforcements arrived within the hour. The total number of lives saved was estimated at 400 to 600. German losses, 37 killed, including one tank company commander. The report did not mention Ivan Petrov by name, but by evening everyone knew. In the mess hall, men stood when he entered. Not with ceremony, not with applause, but with quiet respect. A nod, a glance. Soldiers recognizing something rare, something courageous. Ivan sat with his tray, trying not to notice. He hadn't spoken to the commander since landing. He still expected consequences, maybe an official reprimand, maybe suspension from flights. He accepted it. In his mind, he had done what needed to be done. He did not regret it for a second. Later that night, he was called to the command tent. He stood at attention, eyes forward. The officer at the desk studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "Yes, comrade commander," Ivan replied. "You risked your plane, your life, and the success of the mission." "Yes, comrade commander. And in doing so, you saved the regiment." Ivan remained silent. The officer leaned back in his chair. "This war doesn't need daredevils," he said. "It needs discipline. It needs people who follow orders, even when it hurts." Ivan nodded. "Understood, comrade commander." The officer studied him a moment longer. "But it also needs people who see what others don't, who act when no one else will. And sometimes, by God, it needs people who break the rules to save lives." He stood and handed Ivan a sheet of paper. "From this moment, you are immediately nominated for the Order of the Red Star. You are also grounded for 1 week." Ivan blinked. He fought a smile. "Yes, comrade commander," he said. The officer nodded. "Good. Now go rest, Lieutenant. We'll need you in the air again soon." The rumors spread fast. Ivan Petrov, the rookie everyone thought was a loser, was now the man awarded for valor. He spoke little of it. When asked, he simply said, "I saw what was happening. Someone had to do something." The truth was deeper. Ivan didn't act on impulse, he acted on conviction. He knew the cost, calculated the risk, and went anyway. In the following week, other pilots began. Flying lower, they became bolder. They saw what was possible when one person trusted their instincts more than protocol. Command noticed it too. While official orders remained strict, experienced pilots were quietly given more leeway. "Use your judgment" became a new phrase. And Ivan flew 32 more combat missions over the Kursk salient. He never broke formation again. Not because he feared it, but because he didn't need to. His squadron followed him willingly. When he gave an order, they listened because they knew that Ivan Petrov, a village boy from the Urals, had already proven what truly mattered. He had stared death in the face and thrown himself into it. Not for glory, not for medals, but for the men on the ground, for Alexei Sokolov, for the voices over the radio that thought no one was coming. In private, some in the high command still debated his actions. Some said he was lucky. If his bombs had missed, the 102nd Regiment would have been wiped out. Courage without permission was still dangerous. But others said something different. They said that in war, there isn't always time to ask for permission. Sometimes it's better to act and face the consequences than to wait and arrive too late. And the people whose lives he saved, they didn't care about hierarchy. They didn't care about flight rules or command protocols. All they remembered was the roar of the engine overhead, the flash of fire, the exploding German tanks, and the knowledge that someone had risked everything to save them. They never forgot it. Years later, one of the survivors, by then an old man with trembling hands, was asked about the day he almost died at Kursk. He looked up, eyes misted, and said, "We thought we were dead." Then, out of nowhere, came that plane, like an angel fallen from the sky. One man, one plane changed everything. That's how legends are born. Not in the halls of power or on the pages of reports, but in the memory of the people whose lives hung by a thread and were saved by someone who refused to let go. The bigger picture: courage versus discipline. Long after Ivan Petrov's bombing run became legend among the 102nd Regiment, his story spread through wider circles of the Red Army Air Force. Some heard it with admiration, some with discomfort, but everyone heard it. It sparked a quiet debate with no simple answer. What matters more in war? Obedience or instinct? In July 1943, Soviet command doctrine was still built on hierarchy. Orders were orders. They were to be followed without question. The consequences for disobedience were often severe, for good reason. Chaos could cost lives. Undisciplined units collapsed under pressure. Lone pilots risked not just themselves, they risked entire missions. And yet, war itself was chaotic. It changed faster than any order could arrive. From the trenches of Stalingrad to the skies over Kursk, people often found themselves in situations no field manual could anticipate. Ivan's dive brought that tension to the surface. On paper, what he did was wrong. On the battlefield, it was right. Commanders reviewing the incident were divided. Officially, in the recommendation for the Order of the Red Star, Ivan's actions were described as exceptional bravery under extreme pressure, playing a decisive role in halting enemy advancement. But the note included the phrase, "despite deviation from standard air combat protocol." That phrase was deliberate. It drew a line. This was a rare exception, not the rule. But pilots read it differently. In barracks, by campfires, in cramped frontline tents, Ivan's name was often spoken. Not because he was flashy, he wasn't, but because of what he had done. He almost never talked about it himself. He wasn't showing off. He told the story only if someone else started. That humility made it resonate even more. One veteran pilot, Captain Lavrenti, the Hawk of Khoklov, put it this way: "Every war has daredevils, guys who fly straight through, show off, break rules, and get people killed. Ivan wasn't one of them. What made him different was that he knew exactly what he was doing, and did it not for himself, but for them, for the guys on the ground." Statistically, solo dive bombing runs like Ivan's were high risk and often ineffective. Accuracy was difficult. The window for precise bomb release while avoiding ground fire was only seconds. Most such runs ended in failure or worse. But when they succeeded, they could change everything. Dive bombing became a feature of Soviet air tactics, especially with the introduction of the IL-2 Sturmovik. These planes were tough, fast, and built to withstand damage, but no aircraft was invincible. Dive bombing put pilots in the most vulnerable position. Low, slow, in the open. Pilots were taught to avoid solo dives whenever possible. And yet, Ivan did it instinctively, in the heat of battle, without support. His success quietly opened a door, not in policy, at least not officially, but in thinking. Commanders began giving more flexible instructions, not relaxed, but open-ended. Orders began including phrases like, "use your best judgment," or "respond according to field conditions." It wasn't an accident. It was a nod, unspoken, unofficial, to people like Ivan Petrov. War was changing. It demanded more than machines and maps. It demanded human judgment, moral judgment. Ivan's case became a whispered precedent. Other pilots began to act more boldly, flying lower, taking calculated risks, and trusting their instincts when the situation demanded it. Not recklessly, but with conviction. They planned their missions more carefully. They trained harder. They studied the terrain more attentively. They wanted to be ready for the moment when no one else would act. And some of them got their moment. In Belarus, a pilot went off mission to destroy a bridge that wasn't on the target list, only to later discover it was a key German supply route. In Poland, a bomber crew changed course mid-flight to avoid a trap and accidentally encountered an armored column, destroying it before it reached the front. None of these actions were officially credited to Ivan Petrov, but every pilot who performed them knew his name. Even decades later, long after the war ended, long after Kursk, Stalingrad, and Berlin had become chapters in a history textbook, Ivan's name still lingered in veteran halls, at reunions, and in faded letters home. He had become something rare. Not a myth, not a moral tale, but a symbol. A symbol of the moment when the rigid spine of military order met the flexible heart of human courage, and bent just enough in the right direction. Ivan himself never claimed any of it. Decades later, as an old man with gray hair and sun-weathered skin, when interviewed, he would simply say, "I didn't do anything special. I just saw people in trouble, and I was the only one up there who could do something." That humility was the final lesson. Courage wasn't about ego. It wasn't about medals, headlines, or fame. It was about doing the right thing, especially when it came at a cost, especially when no one else would do it. In that sense, Ivan Petrov was more than a pilot. He was a mirror held up to every soldier who has ever faced the choice. Follow orders or follow your instincts. Risk punishment or risk letting others die. There is no simple answer, but Ivan gave them one possibility. Sometimes, in the midst of the worst war, the right person makes the hardest choice and lives with it. Not as a hero, but as someone who chose what was right when it mattered most. The people he saved. For most of those on the ground near Kursk that day, everything after the explosion blurred together. One moment they were preparing to meet death. The next, they were scrambling to regroup, eyes wide in disbelief, watching smoke curl from the lead German tanks. The pressure that had pressed down on them seconds before vanished, shattered by the precise fury of a single pilot. In the chaos of battle, details are lost. No one knew his name. No one saw his face. All they saw was a silver streak tearing through the sky, a flash of bombs, and the silence that followed. But that silence was life. For hundreds of soldiers of the 102nd Guards Regiment, that unexpected pause gave them a chance to dig in, reorganize, and survive. Some couldn't even believe it had really happened. Private Alexei Sokolov, the young man whose desperate voice Ivan had heard over the radio, remembered looking up from behind a shattered boulder and murmuring, "Did God himself drop that bomb?" A few days later, the soldiers pieced it together. Engineers said the lead tank had carried a mobile command post, maps, radios, even the enemy company commander. Its destruction left the rest of the German column blind. And in the minutes it took them to regroup, Soviet reinforcements arrived. That window, created by Ivan's strike, changed the course of the battle. Years later, at a veterans reunion in Moscow, old men with gray hair and battle medals sat by the fire, talking about that day. Most of them had forgotten many details of the Battle of Kursk, dust, orders, even the names of hills, but none forgot the deadlock. One said, "He appeared out of nowhere, just one of us. He dove as if to kiss the ground, and then boom, like the heavens answered." Another added, "We always said, if I ever meet that pilot, I'll buy him a drink, maybe two." And eventually some did. In 1961, nearly 20 years after the war, Ivan Petrov received a letter. It came from a veteran named Harold Mishin, who had served as a radio technician in the 102nd Regiment. Harold had found Ivan through military archives and veteran directories. He asked for nothing. He simply wrote, "You saved my life. I don't know if you even remember what you did, but I remember. My children remember. Every year on July 5th, I tell them it was the day a man I had never met gave me a second chance." Ivan replied, modest as ever. He said he was glad Harold had made it home. He never called himself a hero. He never mentioned the Order of the Red Star. He simply signed the letter, "All the best, Ivan." Other letters followed. Soldiers from the regiment wrote to thank him. Some called him their guardian angel. Others simply said, "We saw you, and we will never forget." Those people went on to do remarkable things. One became a school principal, another served in the Supreme Council. Several founded businesses. Alexei Sokolov became a priest for veterans returning from Afghanistan, offering comfort that, he said, was inspired by the man in the sky who didn't leave them behind. None of them would have had that chance if Ivan hadn't acted. And Ivan? After the war, he didn't chase glory. He married a nurse he met in a hospital, settled near Leningrad, and became a flight instructor, teaching hundreds of young pilots to read the skies, trust their aircraft, and quietly trust themselves. He spoke little of Kursk, to neither his students nor reporters. When asked what makes a good pilot, he always gave the same answer: one who knows when to pull the trigger and when not to. But those who knew him best, his wife, his children, his fellow instructors, knew the truth. Ivan Petrov didn't just teach people to fly, he taught them to make decisions. Because in July 1943, when everything screamed for him to turn back, when every rule in the book said it was madness, Ivan made a choice. A choice that echoed in lives for decades. And in the end, perhaps that is the truest measure of legacy, not how loudly one is remembered, but how deeply it is felt by those who never forgot what it meant. Ivan Petrov quietly passed away in the summer of 2007. He was 83. The obituary, printed in a local Leningrad newspaper, was short. It mentioned his service during the Great Patriotic War, his years as a flight instructor, his love of fishing, and the family he left behind. There was no mention of dives, no mention of Kursk. There was no need. Those who remembered already knew. At his funeral, an 80-year-old man stood by the grave, clutching a folded flag. His name was Harold Mishin, the radio technician who had written to Ivan more than 4 decades earlier. He leaned over and placed a letter on the coffin. On the outside, he wrote only 4 words. July 5, 1943. Thank you. Inside was a copy of the message Ivan had sent to his father all those years ago, discovered in the military archives. If I do not return, tell father that I would rather die doing the right thing than live doing nothing. It was neither poetic nor dramatic, but it was honest. And in its quiet defiance, it carried the weight of every soldier who ever stood at the crossroads of duty and choice. This line, written by a 19-year-old boy in a dusty corner of the Eastern Front, now lives as his final testament. Because the truth is that wars are made of moments, not great speeches or grand victories, but small, sharp decisions made in seconds, with no guarantee of survival. A pilot hears a voice over the radio. A soldier steps forward while others hesitate. A man decides, alone, to throw himself into a sky full of fire. Most of these moments are forgotten, but not this one. This one left a mark not in medals or commendations, but in lives, real, breathing lives that returned home because someone decided to act when no one else would. Ivan Petrov did not die in combat, but he risked everything for those who might have. And that risk became his legacy. Not in statues or textbooks, but in the hearts of people who saw his shadow streak across the sky. When all hope was lost, in that dive, Ivan became more than a pilot. He became a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to fly despite it. That rules matter, but so do the moment and conscience. And sometimes, in the fog of war, the clearest vision belongs to the one who dares to see beyond orders and follow what is right. So if you remember nothing else from this story, remember this. A 19-year-old boy from the Urals, alone in the sky with orders to turn back, instead chose to rush into danger. Not for glory, not for fame, but because it was the right thing. And hundreds of people survived because of it. What strikes you most? The dive, the defiance, or the consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below.